So I go back to the fact that I was in a hangout earlier on Twitter and I mentioned about Antony C Sutton, and I was really surprised that nobody in the hangout, nobody, certainly who was talking, had even been aware of Antony C Sutton. Now, he was an author, he was a fellow of the Hoover Institute, he was a very serious, fastidious researcher who looked into the background of how did that Russian Revolution happen. And he wrote a book called Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. And I recommend everybody read that. He also did books like Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, America's Secret Establishment, Wall Street and FDR. He did a number of, another one, Energy and the Created Crisis. All those books, I would argue, are as relevant today as the day they were written. And most people are blissfully unaware of fine authors and great people like Antony C Sutton. Now, from memory, I think he died in 2002. And for those of you who have been aware of my channels long-standing on various platforms for years, yeah, I've definitely discussed this individual for good reason. But I'm going to play an excerpt from just one of the rare vids that he did under fair use.
Dr. Sutton, you wrote 3 series of books while you were a research fellow at the Hoover Institute. Can you give me basically the background of the content of these series?
Yes, the series I wrote at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University concerned the transfers of Western technology to the Soviet Union.
Now, if you can't get your head around that, think about China. Think about the number one country in the world that Americans, people in the UK, and many other Western nations import goods from. Even although they're a communist nation, dictatorial in so many ways, but over a matter of sheer decades, people have been programmed to say, well, you know, it's value for money, it's cheap, it's saving me money. But ultimately, when you look historically at America in the last few decades, the UK, we had far better industrial bases for good reasons and skills to match, and the quality of our goods were far higher than what you see coming out of a communist nation like China. But why would you, as a Western nation, any Western nation, help fund, help bring people from that nation to Western universities, educate them before they go back to communist nations, which are a threat to what we perceive as Western democracies? Why would we be doing any of this unless all sides, for a very long time, have been controlled? Certainly over the last, 150 plus years, you could say a lot more, but the fine-tuning of world government and for the acceptance of the unacceptable based around, well, it's saving you money. It's not. It's not. We're sending technologies, and have been for many, many decades, to countries that are the polar opposite of what we represent.
And essentially it comprised 3 individual books. Each book covers a period of time since 1917.
And then you wrote a second series of books on Wall Street.
Yes, these were trade books. In other words, they're not academic books. They're written for the general public. They concerned the build-up of the 3 types of socialism: Bolshevik socialism in Russia, what we might call welfare socialism in the United States, and Hitlerian or National Socialism. And each book examines the financing and the contributions made by Wall Street, by international bankers, to the development of that specific form of socialism.
Now, in your research and analysis, and your efforts to bring out the facts about what was going on in our society, did you encounter any effort to discourage you, to prevent you from bringing out the background of America's involvement in the financing of international communism?
Yes.
Think about that. And by the way, You could argue the UK successfully in so many other places. Remember, the social system, which was the polar opposite of what for thousands of years we were about, based on the premise that we'll look after you. But the reality, historically, has never been the case.
Very definitely. For example, when I was at the Hoover Institution, in 1972, I went to Miami Beach to give some testimony before the Republican National Committee. And although a congressman had hand-delivered to the wire services this testimony, which was later printed, the wire services refused to transmit it to the newspapers. Then when I got back to the Hoover Institution in California, I was called into the office of the director, and I was told in no uncertain terms not to make any more speeches like that, and that this information should not be made public.
This was the information that we were giving the Soviet Union the technology to develop its war potential?
Oh, yes. At that time, we were in...
Think about that, seriously. All sides are controlled. Think of it Masonically. I know even in the hangout I was in earlier, they specifically point out to one section of society who are very much involved in this, but all I've ever said is it's a bit more complex than that. Seriously. You look at Freemasonry. Some people say it's part of it. There's other people that say it's all of it. But it's definitely complex. And all countries around the world are Masonically controlled. And they no longer need the bulk of us.
We were in Vietnam, and as you know, the Soviets were supplying the North Vietnamese.
This was 1972?
1972, yes. And, for example, I knew that the Gorky plant, which was built by the Ford Motor Company, the Gorky plant in Russia produces the Gaz series of vehicles. The Gaz vehicles had been seen on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We were supplying equipment to the Gorky plant in the middle of the Vietnamese War, and these trucks were being used to carry ammunition supplies, which were killing Americans. Now, I thought this was morally wrong, and I said so at Miami Beach and at the Hoover Institution. And it was this type of information that was suppressed.
And so what eventually happened as far as your activities at the Hoover Institution were concerned?
Well, I didn't pay much heed to the warnings. I published a book called National Suicide in the following year, which summarized our assistance to the Soviets, our military assistance to the Soviets.
And remember, what's really changed these days, remember, think about this. All sides are controlled, without a doubt. Especially, look to those countries with the double-headed eagles. That's all over the place. Seriously. I could go into more detail. And I certainly don't know it all, but, you think about it. Look at this Ukraine-Russian war. Now, you look at, euthanasia, eugenics, the white people are definitely getting demonized. Now, what's Russia and Ukraine got in common? We'll take the last of the white testosterone out of this equation. Seriously, it is absolutely about eugenics. Do not kid yourself that there is a country out there that is not Masonically controlled. Seriously. And as I said in that hangout, there is a lot more complexity than most people realize. And you are dealing with roughly about 10% of society. They might not all know within that 10% the same level of detail. But through various methods, they are absolutely committed. And they are behind, I would argue, pretty much all of what you perceive as religion just now. That might not have been the same thing a while ago, I'll give you that. But they are absolutely behind all of what you see as religion now. And they absolutely embrace, what you are missing